treated them with the same sort of demands that I'd been putting towards the men's senior team I brought to that program, and the same sort of accountability and things. I think the drawback, the women are way better listeners than the men. So you need to be a better communicator because what you say has way more impact. I learned that sarcasm isn't a great tool in coaching women for the most part, unless you have a really good trustful relationship. I think they thrive on understanding the why, whereas a lot of guys, either thrive on proving you wrong or just being told what to do and go and do it. So it's been a real learning curve for me as coaching women and all the relationship building that goes on around that. But a useful one, as a father of 3 girls, and it's important to me to understand how to communicate and what the differences are. But it's been something I really enjoyed. I had a chance post Rio, presented with a couple opportunities to go back involved in the men's program. And as much as I care about it, and I enjoyed that, I just really enjoy coaching the women now because my girls are so invested in the program and see them as role models and they're good ones. So I enjoy it. Hi, I'm John Tait, and you're listening to the Rugby Hive.
Today's guest is John Tait. He represented Canada in 15s from 1997 until 2002 with 37 caps, including the 1999 Rugby World Cup. Tait also played 140 matches for the Cardiff Blues and 20 times for Brive. His coaching journey began in 2004 with the Canadian men's 15s program. From then, in 2010, he helped build the Canadian women's sevens program and led them to a bronze medal finish at the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio. In today's episode, we chat about playing overseas, how Ric Suggitt got him involved in coaching, and the Olympic podium journey he took with the Canadian women's sevens team. We chat about the differences between coaching men's and women's programs, how his daughters motivate him to create change, and looking ahead to the Tokyo Olympics. Here is Canadian legend John Tait.
He's so dangerous! Freddy Krueger has nightmares about him!
Hello and welcome to the Rugby Hive. I'm Dallen, Stanford, and despite my South African accent, I was fortunate enough to play rugby for the United States on the Sevens World Series.
And I'm MacDowell, a former Canadian Sevens international. Back in my playing days, I went head-to-head against Dallen in the USA.
For several years, Robin has coached international sevens for various countries, including Canada and Mexico. He's massively passionate about growing the game across the Americas through his MacDowell rugby programs at all levels. I'm currently a commentator for World Rugby, most recently broadcasting the Rugby World Cup in Japan, as well as the amazing Sevens World Series.
More than a decade later, we are teaming up to bring you insights from legendary players and coaches from around the world.
All legends have a story. The Rugby Hive podcast is here to share it.
Welcome to the Hive.
Hello and welcome to episode 22. We're almost done with season 1 of the Rugby Hive, which will see a total of 24 episodes in the year 2020. That's very Jack Bauer of us. This week, though, we return to Robin's homeland, Canada, for a chinwag with women's sevens head coach John Tait. The man is taller than Roald Dahl's BFG. Fittingly, is a big friendly giant. Seen on the Sevens World Series at halftime huddles, he's so cool, he's so calm, he's just very, very quiet, very peaceful for an absolute giant. And also what I love about him, especially in the pod when he brings up, he talks about the women's sevens side and how they're role models for his young daughters, powerful ones. And that's something, we really do love about the sport here, Robin.
Yeah, I've known John since I was a player at the University of Victoria. He was just finishing his international career and obviously his pro career. And he was guest coaching at UVic for a while as a senior national team assistant coach. And he'd be there before practice like I was, super keen. And he was one of those guys that mentored me at an early age, right when I cracked the World Series. And he gave me an edge. He'd stick around after practice all the time. And that meant a lot to me back then. And then through my coaching career, he's been somebody I've been able to lean on a bunch. And obviously with my time with Mexico, I've coached against him a number of times on the wrong side of the score, of course. But actually in 2018 at the Sevens World Cup, we had a pre-camp on Vancouver Island and John helped facilitate a 7-day camp on the coast there. And we got to have 2 big days of inter-squad games against Canada. Then he hosted the whole Mexican team and staff at his home with his wife and beautiful daughters. So he's just the class, and still to this day, I lean on him a bunch.
And also, I've seen you've gone fishing with him as well. I mean, you guys have a good relationship, don't you?
Yeah, John's been out on the mighty Pacific on the old sand dollar craft with my father and I. And although he's a huge man, he only got to reel in some smaller fish, but he was catching fish all day at least. And it was his wife Tiffany's birthday in the fall there, and he was able to come home with a bunch of Dungeness crab and prawns and stuff. He's a great guy. Same guy, on the water as he is at halftime of a World Series event. That's one thing I really admire about the man. He doesn't get too high or too low.
Yeah, I know, quite contrasting to some other guests we've had who, like a Mike Friday, who goes absolutely ballistic at halftime, screaming. But that's the thing, Mike's 5 feet tall, so that's probably why, where John's taller, just calmer. It's easy for the photos too that we picked out for the episodes because he's towering over the team. That's going to be the Canadian head coach.
Yeah, he's such a presence, and he's always got a big grin on his face. So yeah, he's a good man to be around. I think he has more fun than most players.
Now, listen, pal, let's switch across to some very sad news that we heard this week.
Yeah, some devastating news about a former Canadian Sevens international and U20 legend, Jake Webster. He was on the World Series with Canada from 2013 to 2015, and we just want to send our condolences to his wife, Maggie, his young daughter, Millie, and son, William, their entire family, the Lindsay Rugby Club, the Rugby Ontario Union, and of course, all his many teammates and friends and family across the world. Many of the guys that he played with and grew up with are still in the World Series, and it's a tough time for Canadian rugby and for World Rugby. And on behalf of Rugby Hive, Dallen and I, we want to send our best and wish you well at this time.
Thoughts are with the legend. We'll hopefully get some highlights we can throw up as well, so those folks can remember him as well. And we'll put the link as well to the GoFundMe page, won't be, Robin?
Yeah, we'll get it up there. Thanks.
Then in other news, supporting the Ruck ALS Foundation, they had a fundraiser recently to create a bit of awareness as well for them. It was set up by the brilliant guy called Trip Povar, and we had USA Women's Eagles Sevens head coach Chris Brown, the men's Sevens head coach Mike Friday, plus we had the bowler that is Danny Barrett, star of the US team on the Sevens World Series. So I got a chance to facilitate that chat and raise some money for that beautiful foundation as well. And then, Robin, the other news from my side this week, I've had a really good laugh on the second episode of the Free Jacks Live, which is basically a show that delves into the New England Major League Rugby side, takes questions from the audience. We had the Beyonce of rugby, Alex Magleby, which Karen did feature this past week in a brilliant written piece. Gaz Barino put the pen to sword again. She was absolutely fantastic with that feature. So we had Alex on, and we had head coaches from the Free Jacks, Ryan Martin, who's a Kiwi. There'll be soon James Willocks, who's the Dartmouth head coach, who's working with the side. Plus we skipped across and spoke to some players from South Africa, from New Zealand. And we even had the Canadian sensation, now Boston cool man, Josh Larson was on as well, the captain of the Free Jacks. So a real good kind of build up, if you will, to Major League Rugby 2021 with the releasing of their schedule for season number 4. We obviously hope all the matches take place. We hope everybody keeps safe. We'll see how that kind of goes along as well.
Yeah, really excited to watch some rugby in North America and for all those players, all those franchises that are busting their butt to get some momentum, to hopefully get some men on the field. And obviously the crowds most likely won't be there early on, but we'll get it filmed and hopefully we'll hear you singing at a bunch of those games, Dallen.
We hope so. That should be very exciting, my friends. So we want to thank our supporters for the Rugby Hive podcast, Gilbert Rugby Canada, Brand Marinade, and Focus Care Products. Plus, we have an exciting partner, a massive announcement coming soon. Visit us on the World Wide Web at Rugby Hive on Twitter and Facebook, at My Rugby Hive on Instagram. And now it's time for episode number 22.
All right, John, welcome to the Rugby Hive. I'm thrilled to have you on today. So just to get rolling, how are you and your family managing during this strange new world?
We're doing okay. Yeah, we're pretty fortunate that we live in a beautiful part of the world, and weather's been really great for keeping us able to go outside and get out of the house. We got a good distance between us and our neighbors and the community here, so we've been trying to just keep busy and do what we can to keep the mind healthy and occupied. And
I see you've been doing some homeschooling, but also some home coaching. How's that going with your daughters?
Yeah, good. It's it's the fun. It's been fun to have that, and cool to have that much time to spend with them. And I've been using them as guinea pigs for trying out some coaching and some activities that you can do in 1s and 2s and stuff that I thought would be beneficial for our team as well. So it's good to have those live subjects to work with. And so, like I said, it's just always good to have a little bit more extra time to spend with your own kids, for sure.
And how's your left foot developing?
Yeah, I told you about that. I just, I thought I'd learn a new skill myself. So, I've always kicked a ball around, but starting from scratch with no mechanics and stuff to try and learn something. So I was trying with the left foot, and it's slowly coming along. It doesn't have any sort of distance or range, but it's starting to feel more natural. And for me, it's good as a coach. It just reinforces that, I really believe in a lot of component coaching and skill acquisition. So spending some time doing it myself just helps me refine on, some of the cues that you have to do, because going through them firsthand is always a good resource for a coach to experience.
And speaking about kicking the ball around, let's go back to your playing career, if you don't mind, for a bit. How did you first get introduced into rugby, and what other sports did you play growing up?
Yeah, so high school was my introduction to rugby, and I think I had one high school practice before the very first time I played a game, and I'd never seen rugby before, as was pretty common back then. It was never on TV, so access was pretty hard to so I'd never seen the game. I went out, had practice, and then I had a game which looked nothing like the practice we had the day before. I got penalized for, I think, trying to jump over a tackler, just doing things you just can't do. A lot of laws that I knew nothing about. And so I enjoyed the experience and the intro to it. But then a couple of weeks following that first game at 15s, I got a chance to play in a one-day sevens tournament. I thought a lot simpler, and I really enjoyed that. Got to carry the ball a ton of times and run with it in open space. Whereas I don't think I touched it more than once in the 15s game for my first game. So it was a really good experience, and it kind of got me into it. But my two main sports back at that time were basketball and football. But I was, two sports I was pursuing scholarships with in universities, and I was kind of more focused towards those, and rugby was a secondary one. And luckily there was a club down the road that had some summer rugby, and always looking for something to do in the summer back home. That was the next, follow my friends to their rugby practice. So that was really my intro into the game. And then I kind of fell into international rugby after a couple of years of university basketball, coming back in the summer again, playing for club, and the club just went up, promoted a few times, and then got in front of a couple of selectors and got an opportunity through that kind of route.
Well, you played just close to 40 for Canada. Can you give us some of your favorite moments, playing international rugby back then?
Yeah, it's actually with this lockdown, it's been kind of cool, because that's the first time I've seen a lot of games I played in, because they've been posted on some of the American rugby sites here, and some old games, classic stuff, I guess now it's called. But yeah, you have your memory of what it looked, or what it was, and what it really looks like now on video, or they're pretty far apart. It was just on the verge of professionalism back then. So the quality of film isn't great. It's often one camera and stuff, so it's hard to make out. But I do remember quite vividly a lot of the pre and post match activities, and the camaraderie of being in a group like that, and often in strange new places in the world at the time. It was the first time, I think, when I was younger, traveling to places like Fiji and Tonga and Samoa, Pacific Islands, and all over the world, really. I have a lot of memories of just the teams and the guys on the team, more so than the actual games themselves. Probably a couple of games that I do remember a sequence of two of them, probably more so than any others, just because they were such big games for us at the time. As David Clark had just taken over the national team, and we had to fly down to East London in South Africa. It took us about a day and a half to get there. We had 2 or 3 days on the ground, including an inner squad against the local East London club, doing some live lineouts and scrum, which turned into a brawl, or not a full-on brawl, but anyways. And then 2 days later, playing the South Africans, and then getting up on a plane the next morning and flying back to Toronto to play Ireland. It was a strong, full Irish team. I think they won the Six Nations later that year. But we played them in Toronto at Fletcher's Fields there, and tied them. Should have been a win, but I watched that game again, and the dodgy penalty. I think the ref just panicked that Canada was going to beat Ireland, and gave Rod Snow a penalty for collapsing the scrum against John Hayes, I think it was, who he was dominating all game. So felt a bit robbed watching that one again, but it ended in a draw, but it was a pretty good memory nonetheless.
It's so great you're able to go back and watch them now, which is awesome. That's so funny you mentioned the Eastern Cape though in South Africa. So randomly, I spent most of my life in the Western Cape, but my grandfather was the mayor of King Williamstown, which is in East London, and it's a big rugby hotspot. So we went to see family every time there, and boy, do they love their rugby there. So it's really cool you got to experience South Africa, because of course we didn't see much, many overseas teams travel during that period. Yeah,
it was an awesome experience. We did a little safari on our day off, and because they didn't have enough, I think, Jeeps for all of us, talked him into letting us take the tour bus on it, and it broke down and got stuck in the mud after the safari. So we're all out of the bus, pushing, looking, keeping our eyes out for lines, and looking out. It was a great experience.
That's mental.
Oh boy. Well, you come from a strong sporting family, John, and with your brother Luke also playing 15s for Canada in his time. Did you two get a chance to play alongside each other at any stage? Or
Not for Canada. So I got my first contract over in Wales, in Cardiff. And after I was there for a year, I think my brother was just around 15 years old at the time, turning 16. And he was getting big, getting my size. He just hit a big growth spurt and stuff. And my mom was, I think, just struggling to deal with as man-child living with her. So I talked her into shipping him over to Wales and going to high school there, finishing his last couple of years of high school there. And he lived with me and ended up getting a junior contract with the academy there with Cardiff. So within a couple of years, he got up onto the senior team on the bench, actually. So we were in the same lineup, but yeah, the only way he got on the field was for me to come off of it. I guess enough times passed now. I knew that his bonus structure, he would get a bonus if he actually got onto the field. So I made sure if the game was was already decided, I'd make sure I'd get off so he could get at least a minute or two and get his bonus so he could pay me the rent.
Yeah, buy your round, pay the rent.
Exactly.
I remember back in the day, I don't know if it was, I think I was playing for the Crimson Tide and you guys came and played touch one time at the Castaways. You're home for the summer, and there's these two huge guys, and they're just, you could tell they played basketball or something, but they're the Canadian Fijians. They were just like dropping the ball over their head, and the two of them together, they're just magic. So, but I think that was before Luke actually played for Canada.
He started playing for Canada, I think, in 2005. So after I had retired, and I ended up coaching him actually in his first cap for Canada.
And for our listeners there, I know that playing overseas is a common thing now for players in North America as well. But yourself, I mean, you're one of the trailblazers that side. How did you get connected with your professional contracts overseas? And can you tell us a bit about that experience?
Yeah, it's really fortunate, I guess. So I just moved out the year before from Ontario to the West Coast to play in the inaugural Pacific Pride, which is our national academy at the time, and they just restarted this past year. So I just moved out here, and I was about 6 months in, and Mike James, who was playing over in France at the time, made the top 12. It was back then the French finals, so he couldn't come back for a test. So I got called up into the Canadian team for the first time, and I ended up playing 5 or 6 tests consecutively. And then our 7th test was against Wales in Markham, and it was being broadcast back in the UK. And I had an okay game. The broadcaster back in the UK was a hooker I ended up playing with at Cardiff, was doing the color commentary, Jonathan Humphreys. And I guess they saw me in that game, and I watched the game. It was one of the games I watched recently. I didn't do a whole lot, but I did have which I later found out piqued the interest of Cardiff, the coach there, was that I was just mobile and got around the field. And I think I caught the Welsh winger in the corner. It ended up being called back anyways. The whistle went, but neither one of us heard it. But it was a bit of a chase around. But yeah, I just had a good game, and I got saw that way. And I got a random call a couple of weeks later asking if I'd be interested in flying over to Cardiff and checking the club out. Yeah, I said at that time I was open to anything, to go anywhere. So I got on a plane a week or so later and went over there for 2 days. And then, I ended up signing a 1-year contract that turned into 6 more years there.
Well, what I will say is, in any footage when you're playing, I bet you stand out, right? Because of your height. So, so they're watching you and they're like, this guy's everywhere, which is brilliant. Now, a question for you, were there many Canadians playing at the time in that league?
Yeah, we had a lot of, I think more so than we do now, in playing first grade rugby. So there was almost our entire pack, and probably, we're overseas, and I'd say half our back line for the Canada team at that time. So they were all playing in either the Premier, England, Wales, and France, those clubs predominantly, or those countries predominantly, but we were all playing first grade rugby because we were coming across each other pretty regular.
Brilliant. So you transitioned from playing to coaching. What was that like? For
me, it was just a chance to keep competing, and I was probably not realizing at the time, but now in reflection, that's probably what appealed to it most to me, was just a chance to kind of continue on what I've been previously doing as a player for over a decade at that point. So it was good. It was a good chance I was already fully equipped with, of how to play the game. And then it was just a transfer, trying to, learning how to teach others how to play the game and what it means.
And how did you get that start with the national program back in the day?
And so at the time I was playing in France. I was in Brive, and I think it was late August. We were just in the last preseason game fixture, and then there was November, at the start of November, we were meant to assemble in London, and Ric Suggitt had just taken over the national team at that time. So I made myself available to go play for Canada in the November test window. And then in that last preseason game, It was actually the practice before the game. I fractured my neck, and unfortunately, it was at that time there wasn't a lot of high probability surgeries around the fracture I had. So I retired from playing. So I called Rick up and I let him know that I had to withdraw from playing for Canada as well. And then he asked me, because I'd worked when he was women's head coach at one point, and had brought them over to Wales, and I'd done some coaching with the group then, and he suggested to me then that you should consider getting into coaching because he thought I did a pretty good job with the group in the short period of time we had there. So when I had that call and said I wasn't available because of my neck, he just said the same thing. Would you consider coaching? And not necessarily that November, but because I wasn't available, I had to sort out some stuff in France. But opportunity, I went as an assistant coach to what was called the Superpowers Cup back then in April, and that was a competition between Japan, America, and Russia, I believe. And so, yeah, that was I went on a tour, and that turned into a contract, and I ended up working with Sluggo Rick there for the next 4 years through that World Cup cycle, and then Kieran Crowley when he took over.
Yeah, there's been lots of Sluggo talk in a lot of these interviews here. We're loving it. When you made your switch from men's sevens to the women's sevens, the men's 15s to the women's sevens program, how did you adapt your coaching style, and what was your biggest hurdles at the beginning?
What I saw when I came into the women's program is, obviously super dedicated group of athletes that had just been really underserviced in a lot of ways. And, no disrespect at all to the previous coaches, but they were all, pretty much volunteers in a pay-to-play program. I was fortunate enough to get the position just at a time when the Olympic was announced and Olympic funding that came with it. So it allowed us to start put a more professional approach to around the women's game entirely, 15s and 7s. So I was really fortunate in that. So I was able to it wasn't based on pay to play. It was who could afford to play. It was really collecting the best players and the people that wanted it the most. So that was particularly a rewarding experience as a coach because they were so undercoached at to that point. So there's a lot of real big gains to be made early on. And I remember when I started with I asked the question, to one of the players, I think it was Barbara Mervin, how, is there something I should know, do differently coaching women to men? And she said at the time, just treat us like the guys, which is exactly, what I did. And I treated them with the same sort of demands that I would, put towards that I'd been putting towards the men's senior team I brought to that program, and the same sort of accountability and things, which was great. I think the drawback part of that side is the women are way better listeners than the men. So you need to be a better communicator because what you say has way more impact, So I learned that sarcasm isn't a great tool in coaching women for the most part, unless you have a really good, trustful relationship, I think. You just had to really become a better communicator. I think they thrive on understanding the why, whereas a lot of guys, either thrive on proving you wrong or just being told what to do and go and do it. So yeah, it's been a real learning curve for me as coaching women and all the relationship building that goes on around that. But a useful one, as a father of 3 girls, and it's important to me to understand how to communicate and what the differences are. But it's been something I really enjoyed. I had a chance post Rio, presented with a couple opportunities to go back to back involved in the men's program. And as much as I care about it, and I enjoyed that, I just really enjoy coaching the women now because my girls are so invested in the program and see them as role models and they're good ones. So I enjoy it.
Yeah, it's been an incredible Canadian story. And just to kind of look at your first 4-year cycle, building the program, and then this last 4-year cycle, now it's turning into a 5-year cycle, obviously. How would you compare them? Like, what are some of the best practices and what were the hurdles in the first 4 years to now where it's more modern and technical?
Yeah, I think the first 4 years really flew by because there was so much changing. Everything was new. It hadn't been in the Olympics before. They were trying to build the series around it to support it. So, events were changing year to year. 1 year there was Hong Kong and Amsterdam, the next they're both gone, and 2 new events come in. So there was and Brazil was becoming a core team at the time. So there was those events and everything was, touches and heading down to South America a couple times a year. Olympics is all, it's a cycle of 4 years, and it's all about rehearsing every year and refining and getting ready to peak in that competition window where it counts the most. So the difference, I think, in the second year is things just settled a little bit. Our systems had grown. Our understanding of what we're trying to do, how the support staff works best around the players, how we want to operate, interact, all, just it just refined over time. And, and the success of that first squad also brought a lot of opportunity to the second one, more funding, more attention. The athlete pool that we're seeing now and developing now is way stronger than when we started. Previous, I think, to the Olympics, I think we were getting, you have those good athletes in rugby, but in the high school level, certainly in Canada, like a lot of the other sports, scholarship-driven sports, especially in the big sports that are North American sports, draw away those top athletes, soccer, hockey, whatever, basketball, those opportunities. Soccer took off, and rugby our success, I think, has had a big impact in Canada and bringing a lot of those athletes back that rugby, there's a pathway to the Olympics. It is a high performance sport here. And the knock-on effect is now we're getting young athletes that have metrics better than the athletes we took to Rio 4 years ago.
Yeah, just speaking about Rio, let's go back there. How was that Olympics experience for you? And also, how did that result impact the Canadian game overall?
Yeah, it's just a surreal experience. The whole little build up the Olympics from the time you fall into the Olympic envelope, certainly here is just, you're constantly reminded nothing's gonna be like the Olympics. It's just a multi-sport games. There's nothing's bigger, and it goes on, and you're like, yeah, we'll see. I've been to lots of rugby events, but then you get there, and it is big. And I can only really describe it as, if you've coached or played, you get that feeling the day before the competition, a big competition, and it's in your kind of stomach and your mind, and you're already worried about sleeping that night and things. That really started when we hit the ground, in Rio, like 8 days out. It just, it felt like that every day and just got bigger. I think if you look at some of the pictures now of the team, I was, looking through some old games and watching the Olympic games during this lockout as well again. And you just see how drawn the faces are of all of our players, and we just want to medal. And the relief is palpable in the picture. You can just see how drained everybody is. But, even though it was such a rewarding experience, it was just exhausting. And then I didn't really get it because we were the first game going off. We started, the women's event started it. So we didn't get to go to the opening ceremonies. And then after we won, I was like basically on a plane the next day flying home because they needed the space in the Olympic Village. So I didn't have a lot of time to enjoy the atmosphere around the Olympics. I did, I think it was pretty neat going in the dining hall and, seeing one of the Williams sisters and Usain Bolt in there. Somebody, Yvonne Blendl was there coaching one of the, the Scandinavian tennis players. It's a pretty surreal experience when you're in that environment, but it really, worth it.
You have a lot of responsibilities balancing your head coaching, women's sevens role. You're also now the overall director of women's high performance for Rugby Canada, and not to mention a father of three. I know the common denominator is Tiffany and behind the scenes, but how do you balance it all?
I never really give it thoughts in terms of balance, because I always tell the players, you hear people talking about, oh, you got to find balance in what you do and stuff. I think when you're passionate about something, and it's your work, like I'm passionate, and it happens to also be my job. So very fortunate. It creates a natural imbalance because, even when you're resting, you can't help but have one part of your mind's on something around rugby and your passion. I'm fortunate that I said earlier, my girls are fans of the program and are rugby players themselves and want to learn and stuff. So, there's always a way of coming to the forefront. But I think what balance for me is just, is making sure that I don't lose sight of other things in perspective and of what's important on the day to day and long term with either family or work. But yeah, again, I'm really fortunate that my passion is my work.
You got to do what you love when you're all in like that. What were some of your major sporting influence growing up and still today?
Funny is watching them last night on I don't know if you've seen the Netflix documentary on The Last Dance, the Jordan's backstory. Really, it's not just that one season, but I grew up through that whole period. It was right into basketball at that time that he came into the NBA, right until I was playing university basketball. So it's so cool to watch that documentary. And I've read his books before and I've seen interviews and I know what his attitude was like. But when you see it all tied together and the immense amount of respect that, the other stars were looking at him, idolizing him, it's pretty unique. And then his attitude on it, he wasn't there to be a role model or anything else. He was just, talk about passion for a game and competing, so I'd say him first and foremost as a sporting idol. And then when I first came onto the national team, David Clark was the academy coach that ran that academy out here. And previous to that, he'd worked in the Australian Institute of Sport and he worked with a lot of the Wallaby players that came up through there. And so he put me on to John Eales and, just watching his game and some of the things. And I remember asking him, I said, like, does this mean you want me to kick? And he said, no, definitely not. But he did say to me, he goes, that's John Eales being himself. He doesn't, like he's his own human. He doesn't, just because he's tall doesn't mean that's all he can do is push or jump and win lineouts. So he's, like, don't let anybody put you into a box of what you can and can't do. Because, I was never a kicker, but I certainly could appreciate that, John Eales' ability to come out of pushing in back in that day, which was probably 50 scrums in one game, having to kick sideline conversions to win a Tri-Nations is pretty impressive.
Well, I love that they called him Nobody, because nobody's perfect. I mean, that's always stuck with me as a youngster watching him play, legendary. So what fuels you day by day, after a successful playing career and now coaching career?
Yeah, I guess for me, when I first started out in coaching, the competition was really what it was all about for me. And I loved to compete. That was a transition as a player. And now what I get the most out of is actually is watching players develop and teams develop because of that. I really enjoy the training environment. The day in, day out grind and trying to, you just get those extra little percentages out of players and the people in our group. That's what I like the most. And the competition side of things is, whenever this Olympics happens, it'll probably be my last one. That part's not as fun to me anymore. You can only go to Dubai and Hong Kong and, these places all over the world are great. But after a while, it's just a plane and hotel and a rugby game. And I like the work that goes on the field, getting ready before you get on the plane the most. So that's something I'm passionate about. And I'm trying to grow players as well as, growing coaches to take these programs on and try and improve the rugby here in Canada.
And how has your coaching philosophy changed over your coaching career in the last 10 years?
It definitely is shifted from, is very tactically focused when I stopped playing, because that was my experience coming out of professional rugby. And every week you were preparing to compete against the next team and what their, counter movements of what they were doing and, what lineouts are we going to use, what scrums, what attack moves and stuff. And that's really where all the focus was. And when I first started coaching the men, it was very similar. And I just come to realize that stuff's, that stuff has its place and it's important, but the most time needs to be spent on the fundamentals that people can actually execute those plays under pressure and be able to, to respond to what's in front of them when things change. I was really, Graham Henry was coaching in Wales when I was playing there. And when he first took over Wales, it was much different, than where he finished with the All Blacks. And at that time, it was like almost scripting 12 to 14 movements. You're going to go here, do this, do that. And that worked for a while. And then, defenses countered it. A flexible defense, changing defenses started changing that. So you couldn't script things anymore. And then around that time, I saw it as a player, but certainly felt it as a coach, because I left for coaching shortly after that. And then I just had some influences. Somebody else that mentored me through is Mick Byrne, a fantastic skills acquisition coach and, part of the All Black setup for a few World Cup cycles and Australia's in the last one. But he's really a great teacher of the fundamentals of the game. And then through that, I think he's got, able to employ tactics that, along with his other coaches that most other teams can't because of their skill levels.
And how do you feel? Like, everybody's obviously in the same boat right now. Everybody's hands are tied. We got another year preparation. And what's the outlook of your staff and your program, and where are you leading them with another year? Are you looking at this as we were peaking this year, or does this gives us another opportunity to go even higher?
We certainly had, we were building up in the right way heading towards the Olympics. We were getting pretty consistent in our performances. We were just trying to figure out how to beat that Black Ferns team, but we were pretty consistent and, a good mix of some veterans that are, that were planning to retire post Tokyo, but also a good mix of some younger players that probably have another World Cup cycle, maybe two in them, or Olympic cycle. So, yeah, it was pretty disappointing on one hand because we were, moving along really nicely. But on the other side there's some players, those younger players, I think are another year. I'm really excited to see how much better they can be. So it's going to be a year about, being able to manage. And we've been doing a lot of contingency planning. Just, what if you can't internationally travel until post-Christmas? What if you can? What are you going to do that long of a season and you're qualified already? So how do you balance those things out of, trying to maintain the one group of the Landrys and Bens who are kind of, peaking right now, for another year, and then also bring those other ones up. It's an exciting challenge, but it's still a challenge. So we'll work through that stuff. But I think, we're looking at it as at the positives is, this lockdown time is an opportunity for us to do what we can as individuals and small groups, whoever they're isolated with, to improve fundamental skills. We're doing a lot of this online stuff like this to meet and review the season and just really do what we can so that when we come back together, we hit the ground running and everybody's fundamentals are there and we're sharpening those up together, whatever the competition calendar looks like.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to look at it for sure. Why don't you tell us a bit about your staff around the team that you've built across the country to help fuel a very successful 15s and 7s women's program?
Sevens doesn't really have an established pathway here yet. There's just, tournaments can be inconsistent when they pop up and down, and that's been the case really since I started. We've started to make some moves to fix that over the last few years in particular. We've had the university national championships going for the last 4 years. Unfortunately, this year's was canceled because of the coronavirus. But then we had some regional university competitions going on amongst that. And then as well, at the end of the Rio quad, my assistant coach at the time, Sandro Farino, he took the academy, or he's built 2 academies in Ontario where our biggest population of athletes are. It's basically, we did some talent ID previous to that and basically built our academies around, the biggest base of athletes that we'd identified. So we've got 2 there in Southern Ontario, and then a couple of satellite arms of that with some different pathway coaches working with different athletes in different parts of the country. And then we try and pull them together and either through the university competitions or predominantly been focusing on university and U18 players as our targeted group. And, peppering that with some crossover players when we find them from time to time.
And can you walk us through an average day and what that looks like, from the time you get up in the morning to your head hits the pillow? I've talked to a few coaches, sevens coaches in the last few weeks here on our podcast. And, the average fan thinks, when they turn on the TV or they go to the stadium, they just got to coach 3 14-minute games. It's pretty easy, but we all know there's a little more work that goes in and a lot less sleep. So what's an average World Series game day like for somebody that has no idea what that's like for a coach?
Oh, the game day. Okay.
Game day.
Corona day is much different. Game day. It's always an early one, because we try and do a little activation, get their spines woken up and their eye-hand coordination going early. So, if we're kicking off around 10, which is usually a kickoff time for game 1, we'll have them up around 6:30 everybody's up, just doing a little activation, then a quick little meeting to kind of repeat what's usually a mantra by then for day 1. We know exactly what we want to do and what we're going to do for each opponent. So we'll just talk about that first game to make sure we get that out of the way right away. We head back, have some breakfast, and then after that, it gets really busy for the therapists. They're trying to get everybody, some of them pre-tape before the field, getting everything packed up. We get to the field and trying to keep everybody calm and we have a lot of individual goes around, connects with all the players and on their pieces of what they're focusing on in the game. It's just kind of casual at that point because it's like all the work's been done too. So it's just about a matter of like maybe staying out of the way as well. And then, then we're into warm up, preview, kickoff, warm up, down. It's over and over until the day ends. And then, usually get back to the hotel, in the early evening. The time you eat and you meet, it's already 9 o'clock and you do a quick little review, but also most of it's focused forward on the preview of whoever you have, hopefully in the quarterfinals the next morning. And then it's a repeat for day 2.
And what time's bedtime on average?
Gets usually, because the therapy will be going on post those first 3 games.
And I'm speaking, sorry to clarify, speaking specifically to the coach, to you.
Oh, for what's,
like what time, would your day end as a coach?
Oh, well, yeah. So after the medical is done, I would get a medical report on how everybody's tracking and stuff. And then one final meeting with the coaches. And it might just be a casual, everybody's healthy, let's go with plan A. Or it might be, we're waiting on 2 or 3 players and have to ship things and then get that message or have that message ready for the players when they wake up in the morning. So they usually finish around, 11, 12 and and then you try and get to sleep for a few hours, or as many hours as you can, and do it again.
Great. I tell you what, it's been an honor to commentate on the Sevens World Series, and especially the combined events. I got a chance to do Dubai recently in Cape Town, commentate some of your team's matches. And it's quite a stark difference, I'll say, commentating a team like in the men's side, the USA, where Mike Friday comes into the halftime huddle and blows an absolute gasket, to listening to you during your halftime talks, very cool, calm and collected and focused. Is this something that you've always been carried with you, in your coaching career?
I wish I could say it was. It's not, though. I was, a little bit more like Mike when I was coaching the guys. And I did do that, I think, at the beginning with the women sometimes. And, it's one of those moments like, I played in one Dubai Sevens, and I do remember, one of the things I remember vividly from that experience is how out of breath you are, and your muscles are just trying to recover and your brain's just trying to clear. So it's not, I don't think it's a moment to come in and try and light any fires. It's more like, let's take some deep breaths, which is what we kind of focus on first, is trying to clear the mind a little bit. And then just trying to get two points across, I think, at the most, really specific things that, like, this is what, just let's focus on these one or two things to carry forward. And I think that's all the information that players are generally able to take on in that amount of time. And you just got to be wary of, like, you go in there, your message could be misconstrued if it's given with too much emotion, and, and distracting really, if it's given with too much emotion. So it's really just trying to be a calming presence, because it is such a, excitable game and frantic game that, when you get that minute or two recovery, it's also a minute or two recovery from your emotions as well.
Brilliant.
And what are some of your goals in respect to continue to build the women's game across Canada in 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, so I'm really, part of my new role as a director and is just overseeing the women's game in entirety. So a lot of that's, planned to start post the games of really driving some pathway stuff and competitions, and trying to get the provinces on board with a bit more of a unified calendar when it comes to sevens, and when potential sevens age grade and senior events can go off, because it is a community game here. There's no professional rugby other than the Toronto Arrows and the men's side now, but there is quite a dedicated community here. So it's just really a matter, I think, of connecting them on a vision of where the game can go and still be for everyone involved, creating not just an elite pathway, but a pathway that grows the game. So, there's social rugby involved with that. I'm keen on that, because my daughters are keen to be a part of that pathway as well. If they choose rugby as their number one sport, then I want to make sure that they've got an avenue, and that we're just not a national program, but a Canadian program.
Well, John, just want to thank you so much for your time and insight. It's extremely valuable for us and our listeners, and you're definitely the tallest guest we've ever had on.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing them all.
Beautiful ball over the top. Yes, Seppo!
Thank you for listening, you sleek sensations.
If you haven't already, please subscribe to Rugby Hive podcast and catch us on all the socials at Rugby Hive.
We appreciate your support. Be safe out there, and we'll see you soon.
They've taken the lunch money from South Africa.